"You'll never make it here," Victor Matthews muttered, his voice cutting through the room like a hot knife through butter. The words hung in the air, heavy and filled with disdain. Chloe Stevens stood motionless, tray in hand, her back straight despite the sting. Her heart was pounding, but she wouldn't let him see it. She wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. The elegant restaurant hummed with low conversations and clinking glasses. The soft jazz playing in the background couldn't mask the tension in the air. Chloe was used to it. The looks, the dismissals, the quiet sneers. She had spent years serving people like Victor, who thought their money and status made them untouchable, superior. But this time something inside her snapped. She had worked hard for everything she had. Nothing had ever been handed to her. And tonight, she wasn't going to let this man humiliate her in front of everyone. He was used to being in control, the CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, known for his sharp suits and sharper attitude. But Chloe wasn't some servant to be looked down on. She had worked long enough in this industry to see the cracks in the glass houses of the rich and powerful. And Victor Matthews was no exception. Chloe could feel every pair of eyes in the room on her, but she didn't flinch. "Is that so?" She finally spoke, her voice calm, steady. Her words were simple, but they hit him like a blow to the chest. Victor didn't expect her to say anything. In his world, people like Chloe were supposed to stay silent, serve their food, and never challenge those who held the power. He smiled, a cruel, mocking grin, and leaned back in his chair. "You're in way over your head, sweetheart." He leaned forward, the smirk never leaving his face. "You should know your place." Chloe's mind raced, but her expression remained unchanged. She had learned a long time ago that the world saw her for one thing. Her skin, her job, her status. But tonight she would show them there was more to her than that. "My mom had your tattoo," Chloe said, her words slow and deliberate. The room fell silent. It wasn't a loud proclamation. It wasn't some grand, dramatic statement. But it carried weight, a history he couldn't ignore. Chloe didn't move, didn't blink. She let the words settle in, watching as the once confident Victor Matthews froze. His eyes widened slightly, the smirk faltering just for a second. The room shifted, the air thick with surprise. No one had expected this. Certainly not the man who believed he held all the cards. Chloe could see it in his eyes now, a shift, a crack in the facade he had carefully crafted for years. The silence between them was almost unbearable. For once he didn't have the answers. For once the power dynamic was off balance. Chloe stood tall, unbothered, waiting for him to respond, but he didn't. No one did. The room seemed to hold its breath. Chloe knew this moment wasn't about her. It was about something bigger. It was about respect, dignity, and showing that even in the face of adversity, those who are overlooked have a voice. A voice that could turn the tables, break the silence, and leave the so-called powerful with nothing but the weight of their own arrogance. Chloe's heart raced, but she didn't let it show. She stood there, unwavering, while Victor Matthews sat frozen in his seat, his smug grin slowly fading. The silence that filled the room felt thick, like the weight of all the eyes now on them. The tension was palpable, and for the first time that evening, it wasn't Chloe who was under scrutiny. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Victor, the man who had always been in control, had been caught off guard. His usual arrogance was nowhere to be found. The crowd around them whispered in hushed tones, unsure of what was happening, but Chloe knew. She had said what needed to be said, and the power balance was no longer in his favor. As the seconds ticked by, Victor slowly leaned back in his chair, trying to regain his composure. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, but his gaze remained fixed on Chloe. It was a look she had seen before, the one that came when someone was trying to figure out how to win again after they had been beaten. But Chloe wasn't about to let him recover. She wasn't going to let him talk over her, dismiss her, or erase her. The night had already been a reminder of how little people like her were seen. The whispers, the glances, the way she was treated as invisible. But not tonight. Tonight, Chloe would show them all that she was more than just a waitress. Her mind flashed back to the long hours she had worked, the sacrifices she had made for her family. She thought of her mother, who had always been there for her, despite the world's indifference. Chloe could still remember the story her mother told her about the tattoo, how it had been a symbol of strength and resilience. It was the one thing her mother had held on to, a mark of who she was before the world made her feel small. And now, Chloe had used it to strike back at the one person who thought he could make her feel small. She wasn't about to apologize for it. She wasn't about to shrink into herself because someone powerful tried to push her down. Chloe stood tall, her posture straight, her eyes never leaving Victor's. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and heavy, but she didn't flinch. Finally Victor spoke, his voice low and strained. "You think that's going to change anything?" he asked, the edge of his tone betraying the uncertainty he felt. Chloe didn't answer immediately. She just watched him, feeling the power shift beneath them both. The words he had thrown at her earlier had meant nothing, but now they carried weight. "It already has," she said quietly. The words were simple, but they hit like a storm. Chloe had made her point. She had shown him that he wasn't untouchable. The man who had belittled her, who had mocked her, now found himself on the receiving end of a truth he couldn't ignore. He had underestimated her, and that would be his downfall. As the room buzzed with quiet conversations, Chloe stood at the center, the weight of the moment settling over her. She had done it. She had turned the tables. Victor Matthews, the man who thought he held all the cards, was now forced to reckon with the fact that he had been wrong. And as Chloe walked away, she didn't look back. She knew this was just the beginning. Chloe felt the weight of the moment as she walked through the restaurant, her footsteps steady despite the chaos inside her mind. The air around her seemed different now. The quiet whispers and the uneasy glances were still there, but they were no longer about her. For the first time she felt like she was in control. As she moved through the space, she could sense the shift. People who had once looked past her now took notice, their gazes lingering longer than usual. Chloe knew that she had just carved a space for herself in a room that had never truly seen her before. The power of that moment, the simple act of speaking up, resonated within her. She hadn't expected this to happen. She had expected to be dismissed, ignored like she always had been. But tonight was different. Chloe could feel Victor's eyes on her as she passed. He hadn't said anything since their exchange, but she could tell that the silence was eating away at him. She hadn't seen him look so unsettled before, and it gave her a sense of quiet satisfaction. But it wasn't about him anymore. It never had been. It was about her. The evening continued, but Chloe wasn't the same. She could hear the murmurs of the guests around her, the whispers about what had just happened. She wasn't sure how much of it was true, but she didn't care. It wasn't the first time she had been the subject of gossip, but this time she wasn't the one being talked down to. She wasn't the one being underestimated. She wasn't invisible anymore. Chloe continued her duties, moving through the crowd with newfound confidence. She wasn't going to rush through this night like she had every other night before. She wasn't going to be a shadow, waiting for someone to notice her. She was going to be seen, and she was going to stand tall. As the night wore on, she could sense the change in the atmosphere. There was an unease among the guests, a tension that wasn't there before. The men and women who once held all the power in the room were now uncertain. Chloe could feel it in the way they glanced at her, the way they spoke a little softer, a little less sure. She wasn't just another server. She wasn't just someone here to fill their glasses and take their orders. She was someone who had disrupted their world, and it made them uncomfortable. Chloe's thoughts were interrupted when Victor finally approached her. His steps were slow, measured, and there was something in his eyes that Chloe couldn't quite place. For a moment he said nothing. He simply stood there, staring at her, as though trying to find the words to fix whatever had been broken between them. "You're not like the others," he said finally, his voice low. Chloe didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. She could feel the shift in his words, the recognition of something he hadn't seen before. "You think you can just walk in here and change everything?" he asked, his tone no longer mocking but something else. Chloe met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't change anything," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I just showed you what you couldn't see." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was nothing but the weight of their exchange. Victor looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded, as if coming to terms with something he couldn't deny. Chloe didn't wait for him to say anything else. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps confident. The evening continued, but for Chloe, everything had already changed. The silent battle had been fought, and for once she had come out on top. Chloe walked through the restaurant, her movements more fluid than they had been before. The night was drawing to a close, but the weight of the events had not faded. Victor Matthews had been left behind in the silence, but the ripple effect of her words was still echoing in the air. Chloe had done what she thought was impossible. She had spoken up, and in doing so, she had taken control of the room. She had seen the way the other guests now looked at her. There was no longer the dismissive glance, the invisible treatment she was used to. Now there was curiosity, acknowledgement, and a touch of unease. They had witnessed her power, and it made them uncomfortable. But Chloe wasn't looking for validation from any of them. She didn't need it. She had already proven what she needed to prove to herself. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just someone waiting to be noticed. She was someone who could turn the tide, who could stand tall in a room full of powerful men and women. As she continued her shift, Chloe couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in how people interacted with her. The customers who had once overlooked her now spoke to her with respect, even gratitude. They no longer saw her as just another face behind a tray. The transformation was almost immediate, and it made Chloe wonder how much of the world operated on these invisible rules. How many people had to fight to be seen, to be heard? How many had to make themselves loud enough to demand respect? She thought of her mother, who had always told her that the world wouldn't give her anything. But Chloe had learned something her mother hadn't. Sometimes, you didn't have to wait for the world to give you respect. Sometimes you had to take it. By the time her shift ended, the restaurant was nearly empty. Most of the guests had left, their conversations trailing off into the night. Chloe stood by the door, taking a moment to breathe. Her mind raced with the events of the evening, replaying every detail. It was almost like she was seeing everything in a new light now. She had done it. She had stood her ground, and in doing so she had changed everything. Chloe was about to leave when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Victor Matthews standing there, his posture stiff, but his expression was different. He wasn't the arrogant CEO who had looked down on her earlier. He wasn't the man who had tried to make her feel small. This time his demeanor was humbled. "Chloe," he said, his voice quieter than before. "I owe you an apology." For a moment Chloe said nothing. She had expected him to brush it off, to pretend nothing had happened. But here he was, acknowledging what she had done. It was strange hearing it from him. "I was wrong," Victor continued. "I misjudged you. And I shouldn't have treated you the way I did." Chloe stood still, processing his words. She had no interest in his apology. It wasn't about him. It was about her. But she couldn't deny that something in his voice felt real. "I don't need your apology," Chloe finally said, her voice calm but firm. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for me." Victor nodded, as if he understood that. He looked at her for a moment longer, his gaze softening before he turned and walked away. Chloe watched him go, her mind racing with thoughts of what had just transpired. She hadn't expected any of this. She hadn't expected Victor Matthews to acknowledge her, to apologize. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had shown him, and everyone else in the room, that she was worthy of respect. She had taken what was hers, and in doing so, she had rewritten the narrative of the evening. As Chloe left the restaurant, stepping out into the cool night air, she felt a sense of pride she hadn't felt before. She wasn't invisible anymore. And that, she realized, was more powerful than anything. The days following the evening at the restaurant felt different to Chloe. It was as though the world had shifted, though everything around her remained the same. She woke up, went to work, and carried on with her responsibilities, but there was a new lightness to her steps. The way people treated her had changed, even in the smallest ways. The casual glances, the dismissive tones, those were now replaced with acknowledgement, respect. She had proven something that night, not just to Victor Matthews but to herself. The events of the evening had broken something inside her. The parts of herself that had been hidden away, that had been told they were not enough, had found their voice. Chloe could feel the transformation, but she didn't seek validation from the people around her. She wasn't waiting for the world to tell her she had done something extraordinary. She already knew. As she worked, she saw others around her, still trapped in the same cycle of invisibility, still enduring the silent weight of dismissal. She wasn't the only one who had to fight for her place in the world. And yet, she knew that she had something those people didn't. She had courage. Courage to speak up when it wasn't easy. Courage to stand tall when everything inside her told her to shrink back. It wasn't just about Victor or the guests at the restaurant. It was about the choices she made every day. The silent moments when she chose to fight back against the world that had ignored her. But Chloe wasn't done yet. She wasn't going to settle for just a moment of triumph. She wasn't going to let this be a one-time victory. She was determined to make sure her story wasn't a singular event, lost in time. She had changed the narrative, but there was more to do. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, Chloe was called into the manager's office. The familiar tension rose in her chest, the kind she had felt so many times before, when she was called in to be reprimanded, to be told she wasn't doing enough. But this time it was different. When she stepped inside, she was surprised to see Victor Matthews sitting at the desk, waiting for her. His presence was unexpected, and for a moment, Chloe felt a flicker of uncertainty. "Chloe, please have a seat," he said, his tone calm. "I know this may seem unusual, but I wanted to talk to you." Chloe didn't move at first. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she didn't want to show weakness. She had nothing to prove to him anymore. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice steady. Victor's expression softened, and Chloe could tell this wasn't the same man who had dismissed her just days ago. "I've been thinking about what happened that night," he began, "and I wanted to personally apologize for how I treated you. You were right. I misjudged you, and I didn't give you the respect you deserve." Chloe felt a brief flicker of surprise, but she remained composed. She had already heard these words before. But this time they felt different. Victor wasn't speaking because he had to. He was speaking because he wanted to. "I've been in this business a long time," he continued, "and I thought I understood everything. But that night, you showed me something I've never seen before. I've never had someone stand up to me like that, and I didn't handle it well. But I want to make it right." Chloe sat down, taking in his words. She wasn't sure what to say. Game. But what Victor had given her was something more important, an acknowledgement of her worth. That was enough. "I'm not looking for favors," Chloe said. "I just want to be treated like everyone else." Victor's gaze held hers, and for the first time he didn't look away. "You have my word." Chloe stood up, feeling the weight of the conversation settle around her. As she left the office, she didn't look back. She had already proven what she needed to. She was no longer waiting for someone else to change her world. She was changing it herself. As Chloe walked through the quiet streets after her shift, the cool night air wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. She had been through a lot in the past few days, and though the world outside looked the same, she knew that nothing was quite as it had been before. Her steps were steady, but her mind was filled with thoughts. She had spent so long trying to fit into a world that had never truly accepted her. But now something had changed. Something deep inside her had shifted, and it felt like she was finally standing in her own truth. The events of the last week had been a turning point. The moment with Victor, the apology, the acknowledgement, those were just small pieces of a larger puzzle. But what mattered most was what Chloe had learned. She had learned that she could make a difference. She had learned that she didn't have to wait for anyone to give her permission to be seen. As she passed by familiar buildings, her thoughts drifted to the people she had encountered in the restaurant, the guests, the staff. They had seen her, but not in the way she had always hoped for. They had seen her as someone to be served, someone to be ignored. But now they would never look at her the same way again. Chloe knew that she had changed their perception, and in turn she had changed herself. But as the night went on, Chloe realized that her journey was far from over. The world wasn't going to suddenly become fair just because she had spoken her truth. There would always be obstacles, always be people who underestimated her. But now Chloe was prepared. She wasn't afraid to stand up for herself anymore. She wasn't afraid to let her voice be heard, even if it meant going against the tide. Chloe knew that her worth wasn't determined by the opinions of others. It was something she had to recognize within herself. And that was the most powerful realization she had ever had. The next day, as Chloe arrived at work, she could feel the eyes of her coworkers on her. They had all witnessed what had happened the night of the dinner, and though no one spoke of it, Chloe could sense the shift. There was an unspoken respect now, a quiet acknowledgement of her strength. It wasn't the grand recognition she had once dreamed of, but it was enough. She was no longer invisible. She had earned the respect of those around her, not through grand gestures, but through her actions, her words, and her courage. Chloe didn't need validation from anyone but herself. She had proven that she could change the narrative, that she could make her own place in the world. And as the days passed, Chloe continued to stand tall, moving through the world with confidence. Something significant. She had stepped into her own power, and the world around her was starting to reflect that change. As she worked, Chloe found herself reflecting on the moments that had led her here. The dinner, Victor's apology, the quiet confidence that had slowly built within her. She had become something she hadn't known she could be. Someone who could command attention without even trying. It wasn't about being loud or forceful. It was about being unapologetically herself. And that was the lesson she had learned. Chloe didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She had already proven it to herself. The world might have tried to push her down, but it hadn't succeeded. The guests had gone home. Chloe had made an impact, and it wasn't just about Victor or the apology. It was about the truth that had come with that moment. She had shown everyone, herself included, that her voice was powerful. She had always been worthy of respect, but now she demanded it without having to ask for it. One afternoon, as she was serving a table, a familiar voice called out to her. She turned to find Victor Matthews standing there, this time not behind a desk, but in front of her as one of the guests. His face was calm, but there was something different in his eyes, a sense of understanding, of recognition. "Chloe," he said, his tone softer than she had ever heard it before. "I wanted to thank you again. What you did. It really made me rethink a lot of things. I appreciate you more than you know." Chloe paused, a slight smile tugging at her lips. She wasn't surprised, but she was grateful for the acknowledgement. "You don't have to thank me," she said, her voice steady but warm. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for myself." Victor nodded, taking a moment to absorb her words. "I know. And that's what I respect. You've made me realize something important. That no matter who we are, we all deserve to be seen. Not just for what we do, but for who we are." Chloe looked at him, seeing not the powerful CEO, but the man who had been humbled by his own actions. She wasn't angry at him anymore. She wasn't looking for revenge or closure. She had already closed that chapter. "I think we all deserve to be seen," she said simply, turning back to the table. The rest of the evening passed with a quiet ease, but Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. She had always been good at keeping her emotions in check, but now she could feel the growth inside her, like a steady growing force. And she was ready for whatever came next. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was moving forward with the knowledge that she had the power to shape her future. The world might have tried to silence her in the past, but now Chloe knew that no matter what, her voice would always be heard. Chloe had always prided herself on her resilience, but now she realized that resilience wasn't just about enduring. It was about embracing the change that life threw her way, and using it to fuel her growth. Every day, she walked into that restaurant with the same determination she had carried with her for years. But now there was a quiet confidence in her step, a sense of calm that hadn't been there before. The world had changed around her, but she had changed herself, and that made all the difference. The whispers had faded, the judgment no longer lingered in the air. She wasn't just another server anymore. She was Chloe Stevens, a woman who had earned her place at that table, and at any table. And it wasn't just about work. Chloe had learned to carry herself differently in every area of her life. She no longer accepted the passive role she had once played. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, to challenge the people who thought they could control her. She had learned that her voice mattered, and she had learned how to use it. As the weeks passed, Chloe noticed the subtle changes around her. The way people treated her, the way they spoke to her, it was different. But it wasn't just about the external shifts. Chloe had begun to change internally as well. She had realized that she didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. She had already proved that to herself. That truth, that knowledge of her own worth, was something that no one could take from her. One afternoon, while taking a break in the back of the restaurant, Chloe's phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother, a simple text that read, "I'm proud of you, baby." Chloe smiled to herself, her heart swelling with warmth. She had always wanted her mother's approval, but now she understood that the approval she had been seeking had to come from within. As Chloe continued her journey, she made a promise to herself. She wasn't going to wait for anyone to hand her success. She wasn't going to ask for permission to be who she was. She was going to carve her own path, step by step, no matter how many obstacles appeared along the way. She was going to keep moving forward with the knowledge that her voice was powerful, her worth was unquestionable, and her future was in her hands. That day, as Chloe walked out of the restaurant, she felt lighter than she ever had before. The weight that had once held her down had been lifted, and she stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. The world had taught her hard lessons, but it had also given her the strength to rise above it. And with every step, she knew that she was not just surviving, she was thriving.